We ended up pulling and throwing away every tulip and canceling all of our planned sales for every type of flower for the whole year. What I had planned to be a flower farm turned instead to be a fungus farm, and not the good kind of fungus. Botrytis, Fusarium, Fucenia, Antirrhinium. First 2 years of growing tulips were amazing, but year 3 was a killer. In this video, I will tell you how I discovered the problem, the few things that I did right, and the many, many things that I did wrong in an attempt to solve it. I will also share with you what I know now and my updated plan for 2025. The year started out strong. After growing tulips for fun for the past 2 years, I decided to buy more so I could offer them for sale. I ordered 1,300 tulips, so excited to share my new love of flowers with others. In retrospect, I'm glad I didn't expand huge, as at least I didn't lose more. We ended up pulling and throwing away every tulip and canceling all of our planned sales for every type of flower for the whole year. We were able to produce enough healthy flowers for 1 day of sales by adopting a new way to fight the fungus, and I will share that with you. In January, we planted all 1,300 tulips in our raised beds behind the deer fence. All was well, and they started popping up pretty quickly. Toward the end of February, I noticed some damage that looked like slug damage. I hadn't had problems in previous years, but now that I was growing in the raised beds in the grass yard, I expected a little bit. Besides, it was just the leaves, and we removed most of those anyway. I saw some Columbus tulips in the grocery store, fell in love with them, and after a little bit of research, I ordered 500 of them to have for Valentine's Day this year. Since we planted our tulips in the raised beds, we needed to add more beds for our sunflowers. Our goal was to grow 200 sunflowers each week, so I bought thousands of seeds, and we invested in 2 pallets of cinder blocks to allow us to create enough space. The cinder blocks were delivered in early March, and 5 days later, I found the first evidence that the tulips were suffering from something more than slug damage. There were light-colored blotches on the leaves, and the leaf was bent over rather than growing up straight and strong. After a quick Google search, I learned about Botrytis tulipi and was fairly sure that this was the issue. There are a number of different Botrytis strains, so I don't know exactly which ones are in my garden. The disease is spread by wind and by insects as they move from one plant to another. According to the Missouri Botanical Gardens, I should, 1, practice good sanitation by removing all infected plant parts as soon as I notice them. 2, avoid overcrowding to give them plenty of circulation, air circulation. 3, do not overfeed with excessive amounts of nitrogen. 4, avoid overhead watering. And 5, use fungicide. There wasn't a whole lot on the list that we had control over. The bulbs were in the ground, so changing the spacing wasn't an option. We don't fertilize, so that didn't help. And the rainy season in Oregon lasts through May. I figured the one thing that we could do is cover the beds with plastic to limit the amount of water from above in our constant rainfall. We also invested in an inexpensive greenhouse, or white house to be more accurate. I read that in severe cases, flowers could be stunted, so I held out hope that the damage could be limited, but I still did not realize the extent of the problem. Not long after, Steve drew my attention to the damage on the onions. It was the same as the tulips. Light-colored splotches and a weak structure. They were infected with botrytis as well. It was at this time that I understood it infects the buds, flowers, leaves, bulbs of many plants, including violets, begonias, chrysanthemums, dahlias, geraniums, lilies, peonies, rose, and tulips. More of the garden was infected than I realized. I was still under the impression that this could easily be fixed, but I was just beginning to understand the extent of the infection. I started applying neem oil to the tulips and the soil in those beds in hopes that it would prevent any further damage to the tulips. I also treated our patio bed, which has been difficult to grow in since day one. I applied neem oil on everything I noticed with fungus damage. Although, knowing what I know now, I would not repeat this or recommend this approach. I tend to look at practices in the UK for advice because they seem to be ahead of the US in banning harmful substances. Neem oil is banned in the UK, which makes me stop and think. I overapplied neem oil in the first year for sure. I didn't understand how it could contribute to unhealthy balance by affecting the good bugs and fungus. I do question using neem in your garden soil to help reduce fungus, but I do recommend it if you have a mold problem. A good saturation of their holes a few times over a couple of weeks, and the moles, which were a constant problem, were gone from the garden. Amazing, highly recommend it. Not sure if this works for other critters like voles, but if you've used neem in this way, let me know in the comments how it worked for you. I recently discovered a huge rat problem, and now I'm thinking that neem might help. Meanwhile, we built a keyhole planting bed in the front yard away from the infected beds for our dahlia roots, and I started pre-sprouting my ranunculus corms. The tulips started blooming at the end of March, so I picked some to see how they were going to work in a vase. They were beautiful, even with a little bit of discoloration, but it soon became clear that they were damaged, weak, and unusable. I still held out hope that the 1,000 tulips I planted later and treated earlier would still be viable. It was clear by mid-May that all the tulips were doomed, and to keep them in the garden would just give the fungus more fuel. It was a heartbreaking day when we pulled the bulbs and put them in the burn pile. Composting is not recommended because it's difficult to get the full pile up to the temperature needed to kill the fungus. Still, if you know me, you know I'm not one to give up easily, so I looked for other areas of success in the garden. I still had my ranunculus, sunflowers, and the new snapdragons. With a little bit of watering, snapdragons pretty much taken care of themselves over the years. There were several snapdragons here when we arrived, some that I planted, and 5 new ones that I winter sowed for the year. But by the end of May, they showed signs of infection from rust. By that time, I was so frustrated, I walked away from almost everything in the garden. I did do the bare minimum to keep alive what was surviving and started concentrating on fungus control. I started applying Southern Ag's fungicide to everything that was suffering. Later, I would find my lilies affected by the mosaic virus, which is not controlled by fungicide, but that is another story. With thousands of sunflower seeds left over from my original plan, I kept planting them, hoping to have some success. I realized that I had seen botrytis affect my sunflowers the first 2 years. It just wasn't as widespread, and I thought the damage was from cucumber beetles. I kept working with the sunflowers to see if I could control the botrytis. By applying the fungicide into the soil before I planted the seedling, the flowers started off strong. I attempted the same strategy in the beds that originally had the infected tulips, and even then, I saw less disease and a slower progression when it did hit. We were able to pull off sunflower sales for one evening event. After everything that had happened during the year, I took it as a win. So for this year, I have put together a plan based on what I have learned from experience and a lot of research. First, heavy yard cleanup. Botrytis affects decaying materials, so as soon as they die off, they need to be removed. The big task will be trimming all of the rhododendrons I have, as I've learned that they may be hosts of botrytis, but really multiple types of fungi. This is not going to be an easy task, as there are well over 100 mature rhodi trees in my garden. Number 2, we're going to focus on growing plants that are not affected by fungus. There are snapdragons and other plants that are resistant to fungus, so including those in the garden should help me reduce the number of plants that could get infected. Number 3, I'm going to keep the plants vigorous with plenty of watering and attempts to control the bug damage. Botrytis doesn't affect the healthy plants, and it doesn't affect hardwood, just the new growth. Number 4, I'm going to spray the new plantings with fungicide. When I sprayed the Southern Ag's fungicide in the planting holes before I placed in the seedling, less of those plants were affected while they were young, and with regular spraying about every 10 days, that helped keep them healthy. Although it didn't completely solve the issue, I did notice a huge difference. The 500 Columbus tulips will be planted in the White House to avoid overhead watering and spreading of disease by insects. But there's been a rat in there eating my ranunculus corms that I had planted. While I was prepping this video, it got me thinking, and I decided I'm going to try to neem that area and the bulbs to see if that works to protect them from the rat. I'm still going to use the Southern Ag's fungicide though in the planting holes for fungicide protection, because I don't know if the neem will work on its own that way. Number 6, work on healthy soil. So nature doesn't need any applications of fungicide or debris removal to stay healthy. So we are learning how we can mimic nature and those processes to create a balance in the garden with less inputs from us. One of the things we recently learned about is how earthworms can help. Earthworms actually feed on fusarium and other fungus, so we're looking into options to increase the number of earthworms in our beds. I'm still under the impression that this is something that can be fixed, but I still may not realize the extent of the problem. I would love to hear your thoughts in the comments. Thanks for hanging out.